So you're sitting in the question, how can a leadership coach help me? Well, there's two parts to this answer. I'm Janet Harvey, CEO of inviteCHANGE, and I've worked with executives and leaders, sometimes those are in the same sentence, for many years. When we're focusing on leading, we have a very specific intent. First of all, it's not about helping you. It is about being useful to you. And probably first and foremost, it's important to consider, do you have a leadership philosophy? Are there principles and values that are really fundamental? And if they're not actually part of how you are engaging with your team members, with the workforce at large, with your board, that's probably up for review. There may be something there that's changing for you. Priorities are changing in some way, and you haven't quite adapted the way in which you are engaging. So it feels uncomfortable. That's often why we think we're seeking help, as if we did something wrong. When in fact, usually what's true in leadership coaching is that we start to discover that we're evolving, we're maturing, we're changing in response to the change in our environment. If you get the opportunity to work with a leadership coach, you're going to find you're going to make those choices with more purpose, more consciousness, and you begin to feel a sense of influence over your experience rather than feeling like you're chasing it because everything's changing underneath you. The other thing that happens in leadership coaching is an examination of what kind of leading meets the moment. When I was working with leaders in the early part this year of the pandemic, most of the work was about steady as she goes, help people get their feet underneath them, be sensitive to all of the fear that was operating, the anxiety about will we be okay and what's going to happen and all the uncertainty. As the months have worn on, and it's really clear that we're making some really big changes, structural changes in the way that we define what is work. And it's requiring that leaders make the transition to thinking about the future and starting to use their creativity to redefine what the future will look like. That's asking for a different part of you to show up at work. A part of you that, yes, still has the sensitivity. However, you are also inspiring people to follow you. How do you create followership, even in the face of the continued anxiety that's associated with the pandemic itself? Whether it's a pandemic or an earthquake or a hurricane or some other major disruptor, this is a capacity of leading that can feel the fear and act anyway. Working with a leadership coach is a place for you to process your own feelings about that. Not like you're on the couch with a therapist, but much more importantly, to be aware. How do your edges get torn a little bit and you lose your patience and you're not as centered, you're not as focused? Where do you get support for being able to process and work through that? There's nothing wrong with you. You're simply being at the affect of a lot of influences and having some time to be able to have a safe space to talk that through. And then, of course, build some strategy for how do you want to be with your team. Incredibly important to be able to stay the course with productivity while all of this change is happening about you. So you might think about leadership coaching as your own change management strategy for you personally, so that you then can be a good change leader for everyone else you care about. So as we mentioned at the very beginning, your first step is to look at your leadership philosophy, and we have a video for you to take a look at and begin the process of seeing, how will I work with a leadership coach? Cheers and happy coaching.